All right, welcome back. We are dealing with some of the questions from our students. And one of the questions that was asked is Colossians chapter 4, verse 16. And this kind of takes a little bit of time to develop, and I really want to develop this. So Colossians 4:16 says, "Now when this epistle, I'm about the epistle to the Colossians, is read among you, see that it is read also in the church of the Laodiceans, and that you likewise read the epistle from Laodicea." And the question was asked is, well, we don't, we have Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, Thessalonians. Where is Laodiceans at? And that's a perfectly good question to ask. Really, it is a good question, and I want to answer that question. So here is the view, I think the true view of the matter. What we call the book of Ephesians is actually technically a generic letter. What I mean by that is that it was a letter intended to be read and circulated in that area of Asia Minor. And so here is some evidence for that, okay? And then also that Colossians was indeed written to a single congregation. All right, so we know Paul was well acquainted with the church at Ephesus. He was very acquainted with it, okay? And so look here with me. As you can see, if you go from here, see how there he goes to Ephesus, right? So he's going to Ephesus. Now, here's an interesting thing to me. So, Paul was with that church for 3 years, okay? But then when you read Ephesians, when you read what we call Ephesians, let me say it that way. Ephesians 1:15. "Therefore I also, after I heard of your faith in the Lord Jesus and your love for all the saints." Chapter 3, 1 and 2. "For this reason I, Paul, the prisoner of Christ Jesus, for you Gentiles, if indeed you have heard of the dispensation of the grace of God, which was given to me for you." And then chapter 4, verse 20 and 21. "But you have not so learned Christ, if indeed you have heard him and have been taught by him, as the truth is in Jesus." So it seems like Paul did not know some of them that he was writing this letter to. So it seems contradictory, right? So Paul was very familiar, very acquainted with the church at Ephesus, but yet this letter here, it seems like he's not very familiar with some of these people. How do we explain that? Well, it can be explained when what this letter was a circular letter, a generic letter written to that region. That's what I'm trying to say. Number 3, Paul did not make any personal reference to any individuals except to Tychicus, who delivered the epistle to Colossae. So look at Ephesians 6 with me. Ephesians 6, 21, 22. Yeah, look at this. This is very interesting. "But that you also may know my affairs and how I am doing, Tychicus, a beloved brother and faithful minister in the Lord, will make all things known to you, whom I have sent to you for this very purpose, that you may know our affairs and that he may comfort your heart." So Tychicus was delivering a letter that just wasn't just for Ephesians, but for others in that area. And then it's really interesting what we read in Colossians. "Tychicus, a beloved brother, faithful minister, fellow servant in the Lord, will tell you all the news about me. I am sending him to you for this very purpose, that ye may know your circumstances and comfort your hearts, with Onesimus, a faithful and beloved brother, who is one of you. They will make known to you all things which are happening here. Greet the brethren who are in Laodicea, and Nymphas and the church that is in his house. Now when this epistle is read among you," Colossians, "see that it is read also in the church of the Laodiceans, and that you likewise read the epistle from Laodicea," which is we would call Ephesians, or it's a generic letter. Now, here's another interesting fact. Okay, the epistle to the Colossians has a number of personal references, and this, of course, would prove that it's written for the church at Colossae. So let's read it. It says, Tychicus. You can see here Onesimus, Aristarchus, Mark, the cousin of Barnabas, and Jesus, who's called Justus, Epaphras, Luke, Demas, and so Archippus. I mean, it certainly is a case that we see that Paul is very acquainted. Has a number that these have a number of personal references in them, right? That prove this is for the church at Colossae. And then, point number 5, Paul instructed the church at Colossae to read the epistle from Laodicea, and this was probably the circular epistle which was sent to a number of churches, including Ephesus and Laodicea. So, number 6, here's another interesting piece of evidence. Marcion, and Marcion was a heretic, he referred to this epistle, Ephesians, as the epistle to Laodicea. And this would make perfectly good sense if this was a circular epistle written to the churches near Colossae. The book of Colossians was written addressing the specific false doctrines at Colossae, but the circular letter, what we call Ephesians, was written to churches around Colossae. Since Ephesus was the chief city in that region, the epistle was sent to the epistle sent to Ephesus has indeed survived. Now look at point of evidence. Colossae and Laodicea are about 10 to 15 miles apart, whereas Ephesus was over 100 miles from Colossae. This explains why Paul instructed the church at Colossae to obtain a copy of the epistle to Laodicea. Now, y'all have been reading our book, the text of the New Testament 4, so you know that the inscription at Ephesus is not found in the following manuscripts. I think that's really interesting. It's not found. So, could it be possible that Ephesians, what we call Ephesians, it could have been said like this: Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ, by the will of God, to the saints who are in Laodicea, to the saints who are in Pergamos, who are in the 7 churches of Asia Minor that we have, Thyatira, to the saints who are in Thyatira and faithful in Christ Jesus, and of course many others like that. So to the church at to the saints who are in Smyrna, in Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea. See, it really makes sense when you think about it, because why were those, why was Revelation written to the 7 churches of Asia Minor? Well, John, who lived on the Isle of Patmos, was, of course, delivering after he wrote that by inspiration, it would have been sent to these 7 churches. And yet you can see, you can go in a circular matter where the letter can be read. And the same thing with the letter that we call Ephesians. It's going to be a circular letter, generic letter, given to those Christians. And you can see it here. We can see that there are brethren who are traveling. They're going to deliver what we call Ephesians to Laodicea, and most likely Hierapolis. And then, of course, that's where Colossians 4:16 comes into play, right? The Tychicus, he's delivering also a personal letter to Colossae, and he's also going to take the letter from Colossians. They're going to copy it, and they're going to deliver it to Laodicea. And then likewise, Colossae is going to read the epistle from Laodicea, which would be the Ephesian letter. So I hope that answers your question. I think that's what makes the most sense. I might say it this. So Ephesians was probably written at the same time as Colossians and Philemon. It's one of the prison epistles. Tychicus delivered what we call the Ephesian letter, and the Colossian letter. Onesimus was from Colossae, and he delivered the epistle to Philemon. And see, that's why this all makes sense when you put all the historical data together. And then Epaphras was from Colossae, and both epistles mention Epaphras. And then what's really interesting is when you read Ephesians and Colossians together and just notice how many similarities in theology there are. It's really quite fascinating to see that. They're very parallel letters in many ways. And then so Tychicus, he delivers what we call Ephesians to the main capital, right, of Asia Minor. It's a circular letter, Ephesians 6, 21, 22. And then most likely it was, of course, this letter would have been delivered to the Laodiceans. So it's a circular letter. And then thirdly, then Tychicus, he's the one that delivered it to Ephesians. He delivered the letter to the Colossian brethren, the letter that we call Colossians, and delivers the circular letter of what we call Ephesians to Laodicea, then delivers Colossians, the specific letter to the Colossian brethren. And then he tells the Colossians to let Colossians be read at Laodicea and for them to obtain the Laodicean letter. So I think that's what makes the most sense. And Onesimus, Colossian delivers Philemon, in which Philemon learns what he needs to do as a master of slaves, right? So that's what makes the most sense when you think about it. Also, you see that both epistles mention several other persons: Aristarchus, Archippus, Luke, Demas. Ephesians was probably written from Rome or Ephesus, where Paul was in prison. Paul wrote Colossians in response to matters brought to his attention by Epaphras, who becomes imprisoned. And then Paul wrote a generic circular letter by way of Tychicus to reduce the possibility of the Colossian heresy spreading to other churches in the region. And the Colossian heresy had likely spread to Laodicea and Hierapolis. So that's why we see as the case that why the letter from Colossians was also to be read at Laodicea. So that's what makes the most sense. I hope that, I know it's a long answer to your question, but I think it's really fascinating to really put all this historical data together, and it's amazing how much it matches. I mean, I just think that's really exciting. So I really appreciate that question a lot.